When I was growing up, the phrase practice makes perfect was a popular one. Whether you're talking about sports or music lessons or Bible quizzing or whatever it was, the more you practice, the better you got. Wasn't always enjoyable. That's why I quit piano lessons after a few years, because practice was boring. But it's necessary. And when I got to college, I heard a different take on that phrase. Practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And the emphasis there was on the right kind of practice. You can practice something for hours, but if your practice is wrong, your performance is going to be wrong, right? So it's only perfect practice that makes perfect, and who can do that? So I've kind of settled on the phrase, practice makes proficient. And this brings up an important part of discipleship, of the Christian life in general. See, Christianity is not just about what we know. It's also about what we do. Now, I'm not suggesting that what we do earns our way to heaven. As Patty pointed out in the communion meditation, we can't earn our way there. Our salvation is all about what Christ has done for us. But when we think about the call of discipleship, when Jesus called the 12 to follow him, what did he say to them? Follow me. It implies action. And as James tells us in James 2:14, faith without works is dead, useless. So we are called to act. Jesus made this very clear in the end of what we often refer to as the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 7, as he concludes this incredible teaching spanning 3 chapters, he concludes with these words beginning in verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rains came, the winds blew, and I lost my place. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Remember learning that story in Sunday school. Wise man built his house upon the rock. Some of you might remember that little chorus, right? And we loved at the end because the house on the sand went splat, right? Anything to make noise. But have you ever stopped to think about the difference between those two builders? Jesus did not say the wise builder got up on Sunday and went to church, and the foolish builder slept in and didn't bother. He didn't say that. In fact, both builders heard the words of Jesus. They were both exposed to the truth. You could even maybe go so far as to say they both knew what Jesus had to say. What was the difference? One put his words into practice, and the other did not. That made the difference. And that's going to make the difference in the life of Jesus' followers today. Do we take his words and act on them? Otherwise, we might know, but it doesn't do us any good. The life of discipleship, the life of following Jesus, has to be put into practice at some point. Yes, it's important that we learn. It's important that we observe. But at some point, we got to start doing. And in this month that we're looking at sharpening the skills of building our legacy, we've been following how Jesus brought along the 12, how he discipled them, he taught them, he let them observe what he was doing. Now we get to that point where Jesus is going to send them out. They're going to begin to do the ministry, do the work. But how he initially did this is very important, and it contains lessons that we can learn now in our own walk with Christ, but as we're building our legacy, as we are leaving behind those who can carry on our work after we're gone, Jesus gives us some really good instructions here on how to do that. And this morning, I'd like to look at the same event in the life of Christ from 3 different Gospels. Each one of them gives us a little different perspective on how Jesus got his disciples into the action of ministry. I'd like to begin where Phoenix read for us earlier, Mark chapter 6. In Mark chapter 6, we see the delegated responsibilities of Jesus to the 12. The last half of verse 6 says, Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village. Calling the 12 to him, he sent them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over evil spirits. These were his instructions. Take nothing for the journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra tunic. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place does not welcome you or listen to you, shake the dust off your feet when you leave as a testimony against them. They went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. See, having selected the 12, Jesus spent time with them. He taught them. He had them watch as he did the work of the ministry. He clarified his expectations for them, and at one point he released them to do the work. Now I want you to notice, this is while Jesus is still with them. We're not to the end of the Gospels and Jesus says, oh, by the way, guys, I want you to carry on now. Good luck. He's doing this while he's still with them, while he is still active in ministry. Because as we're going to see, part of this plan was they were going to come back to him and he was going to give them important feedback. So don't wait until you're halfway out the door, so to speak, to find somebody to take over for you and say, oh, by the way, I need you to do this. Have at it. This was intentionally done. And as we're going to see, it was done on a smaller scale so that they could get used to what they're doing, and gradually it would increase and grow. So he's giving them the same teaching and the same miracles, but I want you to notice he doesn't just send them out. He sends them out with his authority. The word here in Mark for sent, when it says he sent them, is a Greek word from which we get the word apostle. I don't know what you think of when you hear the word apostle. You think, yeah, the 12 guys that followed Jesus, they're the heroes of the church. They were the original ones. It simply means someone that's sent with the authority of the sender. I authorize you to go in my name with my authority to do what I can't do because I'm not there. That's really what this idea of sending out, what an apostle was. Now, this is very unusual in Jesus' time. Jesus was known as a rabbi. He was a teacher. And it was very common for Jewish teachers to have disciples, to have followers. But they mostly listened and learned and maybe did the things the master needed done and he didn't really want to do. But very rarely did a Jewish rabbi send his disciples out on their own with his authority. That just didn't happen. Jesus is doing that. And he's doing it here because he knows that at one point, not too far away, he's going to be leaving them. They're going to be doing this on their own, so he begins now that training process. And he sends them out with his authority. They were not only to preach about the kingdom, but they had the power to cast out demons, to heal diseases. Those were the credentials, right? If somebody said, well, how do we know these guys are for real? How do we know that they're truly representing Jesus? Well, they had Jesus' power to do the things he was doing. In fact, in the chapters leading up to this, Jesus was doing precisely this. He was preaching, he was healing the sick, he was driving out demons, and now the 12 are going to be doing the same kinds of work to show that they were truly authorized by him. He sent them out in pairs. Didn't send them out individually, but they went in pairs. Now, ultimately, they would go out on their own, but initially, he's sending them out 2 by 2 to encourage each other, to maybe keep each other in check, to complement each other. This is a training session. Now, in this same passage in Mark 6, we also see the defined restrictions. Jesus told them, take nothing for your journey except a staff, just, basically a hiking stick. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra tunic. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave. What's that all about? Well, don't just be going around house to house finding out who's got the best food or who's got the most comfortable bed. If you go someplace and they accept you, stay there. Teaching them a little bit about contentment at this point. Why would he tell them not to take anything with you? I mean, think about the last time you went on vacation, right? How much did you pack? I'm sure it depends on if I'm talking to the husbands or the wives at this point. Mm-hmm. I know for us, it's not what we take with us, it's how much we bring back. But that's a whole nother story. But can you imagine, you're getting ready to go for maybe a week's vacation. You lay out all the clothes on your bed. You think you've got all the shoes for all the different occasions you might run into. You got all this stuff ready to go. And when you leave, you leave it all there and you just take your toothbrush and a coat. That's kind of what Jesus is saying here to these guys. Don't worry about taking a whole lot of stuff with you. Don't be carrying a lot of extra baggage. I want you to trust me. I don't want you to be so concerned about, what you have that it takes away from what you're doing. Trust in me. I'll make sure that you are cared for, that you have all that you need, but you don't have to worry about that yourself. In essence, they were to travel light, and they could travel light because they were trusting God to meet their needs. Now, I'm not saying Christ sends all Christians the same way he sent these disciples, but it does remind us that ministry isn't about what we get out of it. Ministry isn't about amassing a fortune or a kingdom for ourselves. It's about serving Christ by serving others. So it's not all about me. Now, in Matthew's account of this same event, it's found in Matthew chapter 10, we see another defined restriction. Matthew's the only one that mentions this, and frankly, it's confused a lot of people. In verse 5 of Matthew 10, these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. I said, well, now why would Jesus do that? I mean, didn't Jesus come to die for the sins of the whole world? You know, at the end of Matthew, doesn't Jesus tell these same guys, go and make disciples of all nations? What's the deal? Why is Jesus putting this restriction on them, saying, only go to the Jewish people? Don't go to the Samaritans, don't go to the Gentiles. Now, some have taken this to mean that when Jesus came to earth as Israel's Messiah, he fully expected to establish his kingdom. He offered the kingdom to the Jews. He was intent on reigning as king so his earthly kingdom could begin. But only when Israel rejected him, now God's like, I better get plan B. Now we'll branch out to the Samaritans and the Gentiles because plan A didn't work. I'm sorry. I don't see that at all. For one thing, all throughout Jesus' ministry, he was saying, I'm going to be crucified. He knew he wasn't going to become king this time around. He had a different mission. And it wasn't something thrown together at the last minute when plan A didn't work. Plan A always was he was going to come to die as a sacrifice for the sins of the whole world. So I don't think that's the explanation here. Now, it is true that God's intended plan was always to work through the Jewish people to bless the whole world. That's been true since Abraham. Paul said in Romans 1:16, salvation is to the Jew first, then to the Greek. Jesus told the Samaritan woman at the well, salvation is of the Jews. But notice, it's not for the Jews in an exclusive sense. So I don't think that this is an indication that God is only concerned about the Israelites right now and later on he changes his mind. I don't think that's the case. What I believe we see here is a more practical reason for this defined restriction. This is a strictly limited mission in time and in location because it is preparation for a wider mission later on. What Jesus does here, he says, look, I want you to go to the people you already know. I want you to go to people that already speak your language. I want you to go to people that you already are familiar with their customs. That familiarity is a good introduction to a broader mission down the road. Instead of dropping them in on the deep end and say sink or swim, he's letting them start off in the kiddie end, right? Where you can still stand up and not be afraid of drowning. He's getting their feet wet, so to speak, and he's doing so by limiting the scope. And I think there's a good lesson for us as well. Remember several weeks ago when we were talking about sharing your faith, I had a little sheet of paper. It had 10 lines on it. And I asked you to write down the names of people that you already know who don't know the Lord, who don't come to church. And what was the title of that little sheet? Anybody remember? My mission field. We're all missionaries. But why do we start with the ones we already know? Because frankly, that's the easiest people to talk to initially. Start small, start simple, start with the familiar, and then you can grow into the larger actions later on. Think about that in the case of a church ministry. Let's say that you went to Kim and said, hey, I'd like to help out with the kids, right? After she recovered from fainting. I'm sure she wouldn't say, well, there they are, go at it. She would say, let me show you what we do. Here's some of the lesson plans. And why don't you come in and watch me teach the kids? And after you've done that for a couple of weeks, she might say, okay, I'd like you to do just one little section of the lesson. See that gradual building up. That's smart. You give them a little piece at a time. I've had some people in both of our churches here that have expressed an interest in preaching. I don't say, okay, here's a date, go for it. Start small. I recommend that when they get up to preach, that shouldn't be the first time they're behind a pulpit on a Sunday morning. Sign up for a scripture reading. Sign up for a communion meditation. Do something where in just a little way you're feeling what it's like to be in front of the people. You get a sense of being able to speak in front of others in a small way. And then that can build until someone's ready. We've had Rodney Theobald come here. He's preached at both churches on a few occasions. I guarantee you, 4 years ago, if you'd have told him that, he would have dropped over and fainted too. But he started by reading Scripture. Now, I'm not saying everybody reads Scripture. I expect him to preach a sermon, okay? So don't worry about that. But if that's your ultimate goal, start small. If you've got somebody that you're wanting to invest in so that when you're no longer doing that ministry, somebody can do it behind you, don't wait until you're ready to leave. Start now and start small. Let them learn gradually, bring them along, just like Jesus did with his disciples. We've said this on a number of occasions, but it bears repeating. Every church is one generation away from extinction. If we don't pass along to the next generation, when we're gone, what's left? And folks, it's happening all around us. I haven't seen a recent statistic, but the last time that I heard, on average, 7 churches in the United States close permanently every week. Why? In a lot of cases, it's because no one's been prepared to carry on. And the church literally dies out as the members age and pass into eternity. There's nobody there to pick it up. We need to start now. And you say, well, what I do isn't all that important. Everything you do is important. If you're a greeter, find somebody and show them how to be a greeter. If you count the money or whatever it might be, find somebody that can do it while you're not here and ultimately can carry it on when you're gone. Think of it this way. Think of it like when your kid starts to ride a bike, we put training wheels on the back, right? Now, they're not meant to be permanent. But boy, they're really nice to have when you're first starting out, right? Saves a lot of scraped knees and elbows. Or if they're learning how to bowl, you put the bumpers in the gutters, so they can actually hit a pin once in a while, right? You don't do that forever. These are temporary, and that's exactly what Jesus is doing here. He's giving them something small that they can grow into. And as we're discipling others, that's a really good way to do it. Start small and let it grow. Remember when I joined the fire department? I didn't know anything about firefighting. I still don't know a whole lot more than that now, but when I first started out, I didn't know a thing. I didn't know what the tools were or what they were for. I didn't know anything at all. But the guys there, they brought me along. We have trainings, and sometimes the training is we just sit and listen. Sometimes the training's more hands-on. We're able to do something, and we're going to use this particular equipment, and so we're going to build a little controlled fire here and show how to put it out. So that when you get to something that's burning out of control, that's not the first time you've used it. And when you come along slowly, you learn more and you become more proficient as you practice. And even though you may never become perfect at it, that's not really the idea. It's to become proficient. It's to be able to do it. And Jesus gives us a really good example of how to bring them along gradually. Then finally, in Luke's Gospel, Luke chapter 9, we see the last aspect of this kind of training. It's what I'm calling the developmental review. In verse 10 of Luke chapter 9, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. This is the after effect, the after report. Once the disciples had done their limited ministry, they came back and they reported to Jesus. Elsewhere it says they were real excited because their ministry was a success. They taught about the kingdom. They healed people that were sick. They cast out demons. They're all excited. They couldn't wait to tell Jesus. And I can just imagine Jesus smiling as he's hearing these reports. And he's sharing that excitement with them. This is great. And then he says, hey guys, let's take a break here. Let's go on a retreat. Let's talk about what took place and what you've learned and maybe how we can learn things from that. Chuck Swindoll called that a debriefing. That's something that I do know about. Because in my role with the fire department, I've had the opportunity to conduct some debriefings. A debriefing is a careful review upon completion of a task. Unfortunately, we tend to only do these in the fire service when it's something traumatic. You've had a really bad call, and you call everybody in. You review what happened. You talk about what were you thinking and feeling at the time. Maybe, if it's been a day or two or a few hours, whatever, how are you feeling now? You go over things. Could we improve? But the idea here isn't to cast blame. It's not to, point fingers. Sure, maybe you could do something different, but it's done in a constructive way. And maybe some of them are struggling with what they've seen and what they've experienced. It's a place to support. It's a place to reassure that things may not have gone the way you had hoped, but that doesn't mean that you're responsible. Sometimes you can do everything right and it turns out wrong. That's a very important element as we are teaching. That review, go over it with them. Tell them what they did right before you tell them if they did anything wrong. In fact, tell them 5 or 10 things they did right to the one thing maybe that needed some improvement. Be positive. Be encouraging. Build them up. Answer their questions. Give them some hints of how things could go. Offer those helpful critiques and constructive praise that will help them evaluate their development. Jesus took these 12, he brought them along, but he brought them along slowly. He didn't just say, listen to me and watch. He said, now it's time for you to do. Give you some hands-on experience. Now, I'll tell you what, anybody that's been in that position, that's a little scary, okay? Because you're not really sure how it's going to go. And if you're the teacher and they're the student and they get up to do it and you're thinking, man, I hope they don't make a mess of this, right? It can be a little scary. And remember your first time of doing anything. It's usually not as well as we'd like it to be, right? Give them that grace. Give them the grace to grow. Give them the opportunities to grow. And eventually, they're going to be able to do it on their own. And that's going to free you to do more. And it'll establish a legacy that'll live on after you're gone. See, discipleship is more than book learning. It's more than observing others minister. At some point, that instruction, that observation, it really must translate into action. And that action ought to be gradual, practiced in a controlled setting under the watchful eye of the more experienced believer. Practice may not make perfect, but practice can make proficient. Proper preparation and oversight and feedback can help ensure that the practice is a positive step toward doing the work on one's own. It certainly worked with Jesus and the 12.